start off with a game is not just mechanics, all right? A lot of people, a lot of game developers, they sit down, they build the game, and the only thing really going on in their head is the mechanics of the game, the movement, the combat, the stats, enemies, items, rules. Mechanics do matter, but they are not the only thing that matters. At the other end of the spectrum, some people become too focused on the story, which, while important, it's not the only thing that matters. Because, like all things in life, it's about balance and equilibrium, not being too far in one direction. All right? A game is also how it looks, how it sounds, the fantasy the game creates, the technology that makes this possible, what the player is able to understand, feel, and interpret. If you only think about mechanics, you might build a system that, on paper, right, is correct, but dead in the player's hand. Why do you think there's so many of these games, these big budget games, that are made by these huge studios based solely off what an analyst says, right? On paper, this should work, and yet it fails, all right? A game is not just the rules, a game is the whole experience the rules and systems create. If your game only works in your design document and your internal meetings, it doesn't actually work yet, all right? As a game designer, even as an indie developer, you have to sit down and diagnose games, all right? If you are just a player, you look at the game from the outside. You might say, huh, that was fun. That was boring. That felt good. That felt confusing. You know, and a lot of people who start making games, they start off as a player and they are trying to create a game that I won't say for everyone, right? Some people make money, make games to make money. That's why there's so many videos on like how to market your indie game or how to make money on what games sell the most on Steam. All right, I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people that have an exquisite palette, right? They started making games. They started the journey of making games because they have an itch that wasn't scratched. And if you have an itch that wasn't scratched, right? And you're trying to transition from a player to a game designer, words like good, confusing, boring, and fun are absolutely useless. It's unhelpful. You have to be a doctor, right? You have to be a doctor in terms of game design, all right? If someone says, "Hey, your game is slow," what is slow, man? Is it that the physics are slow? Is it the movement mechanic that's slow? Is the animation slow? Is the UI slow? Is the level too large and so the game's pacing feels slow? Is content padded out? Is it not actually slow, but the way the camera functions, does it have too much smoothing and it makes it feel slow? Is the character not responsive and snappy? Is it the actual code? Is it not performant? There's a bunch of possible reasons for slow. Players simply feel the symptoms. We have to figure out the causes. A player can just be like, hey, this is bad, but it's up to the designer to figure out, which organ of the game is failing. And one thing I realize is people don't work and function based off logic. They function and work based off emotion. I lost my job because even though I spoke truth and logical and I thought that was enough, no, because the truth made someone feel bad, I lost my job, even though it was nothing bad. You know what I mean? Just because, you can't reason with logic. I'm sorry. Logic isn't gonna, it ain't shit, when dealing with people. Anything people oriented, people don't care about logic. They care about feelings, all right? People talk in terms of feelings. So, the four things every game is made up of is first, the mechanics of the game. These are the rules, the goals, the actions, the systems, and the procedures. Second, it's story. It's a sequence of events, the fantasy, the context, the meaning behind these actions that the player takes. Third, aesthetics. What the player sees, hears, feels, emotionally absorbed. It's that game juice. Fourth, it's the material or the engine that makes the game possible. So if it's a board game, it could be the paper cards, the board itself, the programming language, Unity, Godot, your custom language, a controller, a touchscreen. None of these elements live alone, but they all affect each other, all right? So overall, mechanics, story, aesthetics, and technology are not separate boxes. They are all one machine, all right? One interconnected machine that should be taken seriously because it all impacts the final flavor of the game, you know? So the next thing, it's like, okay, so talking about mechanics, right? Mechanics are the rules of the game. They decide what can the player do, what can't the player do, what's even the goal, like what happens when the player does something, what counts as success, failure. But they also need support, all right? These other three elements must support the mechanic. If your mechanic is central to or pivoting around like fast dodging, your technology needs to be responsive. Your visuals need that snappiness. Your UX UI need that snappiness. It must all serve the central theme, emotion of the story, of the intention behind this game. All right, everything must be in unison. All right, you could have a game about speed, right, and then neglect everything else, man. Even the story needs to be fast paced. Immerse yourself. I love cultivation novels because there's like the Tao, right? You need to pick a Tao, right, and serve it, right. It's a story. Oh my bad, let me yawn. I'm tired. A story, right, isn't just a bunch of cutscenes. They think dialogue, they think lore, they think character. If that's all you needed for a game, they would work. But a game is a different medium. A game is a different medium than traditional storytelling. And so, you want to do a narrative story-based game, well, you can't treat it like a book because it won't be engaging. All right? A story is simply the meaning of what is happening as the player plays. All right? You have to take into account the physical play experience of the player, man. Some of these narrative stories are so boring, unengaging. Sometimes the cutscenes just take me out of the pacing, out of the flow state. So if you do have a narrative game, you have to take flow into account. Like nothing worse than you taking me out of the game to tell your story. Like, I don't want to hear you tell me your story. I want to experience your story, firsthand. I want to live the story. All right. Aesthetics, the aesthetics are how the game looks, sounds, and feels. It's not extra. All right. This is not polish you put at the end. Aesthetics are literally one of the most important things, man. Listen, you already know about the halo effect. You already know about this shit. You know how important looks are. Like, you can downplay it, but we judge things by their looks. We judge books by their cover all the damn time, man. Your game could be good, but if the aesthetics ain't it, if the aesthetics, I'm like, I'm not even gonna give it a try, man. Like seriously, if the game is supposed to feel dangerous, the art, the sound, the animation, the UI elements, the GUI should create that danger and express it. If your game is supposed to feel cozy, right? The color direction, the application of the color theory, right? The contrast, the sounds, the pacing, the feedback should all create comfort, all right? If the game is supposed to feel powerful, attacks need weight. The menu button clicking should feel heavy and strong, Hits need impact, enemies need reactions, rewards need celebration. If your game is loop based, right? Make it more casino like, you know? Aesthetics tell what the player to feel, it's not something you should leave at the end. I think it's one thing you should really focus on when building a game is lock the gameplay loop. Ask yourself, what is the player going to be doing 80% of the time, right? like listen, the thing with games is the designer has an intended way to play the game, players have another way of playing the game, all right? You can't account for that. um but for the most part though, like, for example, let's say Pokemon, right? I like certain aspects of Pokemon more than others. If I were to make a Pokemon game, I would spend all my time and energy on perfecting the battle and capture loop. I don't care. I would force myself to make that excellent, right? Because that's really what I want to care about. Not so much the story. Like, the story is definitely important. But for me, the emotion I would want is the feeling of acquirement and feeling powerful, right? So for me, I would just have to focus on the battle loop, all right? While other people, they really love the the feeling of creating friends with Pokemon. Then what they would have to do is not focus so much on the battle loop. They would have to expand on the breeding aspects. Like, for example, each Pokemon game has different little mini games. Some of them have, like, what is it like? I forgot. I know Diamond and Pearl, Platinum had the pageants. Doesn't matter. If you wanted to make a more cozy Pokemon game, you would focus more on the breeding, on the pageant shows, feeding your Pokemon more berries, maybe some more farming, a little deeper into the farming. All in all, the aesthetics matter, and then and the other thing is, you would sell the game differently depending on what you really want to focus on. Same game, but different focus, different intention. Highlight different features. And also, if you're a solo developer, be lean, man. It's very tough. A game encompasses many different domains. um, Game development is not simply a single domain, it's many subdomains that people could spend their entire lives mastering, and you got to bundle it all up. You don't have to be the best at everything, you just got to be the best at doing what you want to do, all right? Last but not least is technology, right? Technology is not different. Technology is not just the hardware, man. It's what you use to build and make the game possible. The hardware, what you use to build the game, is just as important. You need to figure out what it is, what's your intention, and figure out the game engine that enables you to work the best. Um, Overcoming friction, I don't think is an option. All right, figure out what works for you. If Godot doesn't work for you, try Unity. If Unity doesn't work for you, try Default. If Default doesn't work for you, I don't know. Those are the top. Those are the three that were at the top of my head. Maybe try Framework. Maybe even try building your game in Roblox. You know what I mean? Like, just figure out what works for you and helps you express what you wish to do the most, right? For example, with me, um, I really tried to make procedural generation work, right? But while I can in some aspects, I was getting a lot of friction in these game engines. A lot of friction. Because the procedural generation, it's like I had to work with the engine and I was having too much friction and I was spending too much time learning about that. While if I just did it in code, it was a lot easier than trying to figure it out using the editor and whatnot. It is what it is. Just figure out what you got to do. Nothing is gonna be perfect. There's gonna be pros and cons. Um, for me, I tried a bunch of shit. Ultimately, I said, fuck it. I'm just gonna master JavaScript. For me, it's not the perfect, right? It's not perfect. Some of the shit is mad weird, and the language itself is not as intuitive as like Lua and whatnot. But JavaScript has so many like libraries, right? It has the Edgeway AI that I can actually like leverage it somewhat. But also I said, fuck it. I can just build my own tool that represents my brain better to make the best games that I can. Because the thing is also this: chances are the ideas you have and the games you wish to build are more similar than they are different. There's probably more patterns, and there's probably like a lot of similarities amongst all the ideas you have. And I would say pick, right? Because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to master either programming language or even a framework or game engine. Pick what serves you the best and has the most pros for you, right? Like for example, you could want to do Godot, but you really feel like the your games is based, like, my bad. You could want to do Godot, but then you feel like for your game the way to go about it is mobile, and then maybe at that point Unity would be better, you know. So it's up to you to figure that out. Pick what serves the vision the most, and all of these four elements must agree. All right, it must all be in alignment. All right. A game feels uncanny when the mechanics say one thing, the story says another thing, the aesthetics say another thing, right? And then you're building these things, and the technology, like the engine, just isn't built for that type of thinking. A good example would be this. Part of the reason I also don't like game engines is because most game engines are object oriented, right? And opinionated. That's one of the biggest friction points. And I like emergent phenomena, right? With object oriented programming, that's very tough. So by technology supporting the vision would be, I would need a game engine like Bevy that has an entity component system, because an entity component system lends itself to more creative aspects. Like for example, I don't know, let's say I make a Pokemon game and it's raining and I use an ECS. If I use an electric attack, or I'm trying to think. Okay, let's say there's water, right? And I use a fire attack. If you use an ECS, you can easily make an interaction between the fire and water, creating steam, and make steam an emergent damage, right? OOP, that's pretty tough. With ECS, yes, you can make steam happen very easily. Or if there's a puddle of water and there's electricity, the electricity will, I forgot the word, but would the water conduct the electricity? I don't know. What I'm trying to say though is like you're able to create these interesting and like, whoa, that worked type of events happening in the game with ECS. With OOP, very tough. OOP. It's because the components. You give things components, and as long as it has those components, it can apply to it. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, you gotta figure out. Hell, even another thing I would say is like, if we talk about like building and technology a bit more, object oriented and ECS are not the only paradigms. There's lots of ways of building things. There's even like procedural programming, functional programming. You have to figure out what works for your brain and the way you think. But yeah, I mean, that's probably I'm gonna like. Let's see. I guess the other thing we could talk about is that, you know, when I talk about like serving the intention of the game or the primary feeling of the game, one of the things you definitely have to take into account is information hierarchy very seriously. Like, I would definitely say take information hierarchy very seriously, because I think that's one of the things that kills flow a lot, you know, and make and just rank the info by information hierarchy. I'm talking about like the art, animation, the sounds, the menu choices. Like, things have to be presented in a way of like importance, if that makes sense. Like, even cause I don't know, I would like, I don't know, like look at the Call of Duty UI and menus and shit like that, man. Absolutely terrible to navigate. Absolutely terrible to navigate. But I mean, that's all I gotta say. Hope you have a good day. Bye.